Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. It's Friday the 31st of January and my name is Brian Liddy, and today is the 1073rd day of the war in Ukraine. A Russian drone attack on a residential block killed 9 people, including 3 elderly couples, in the eastern Ukrainian city of Sumy, officials said on Thursday. Images distributed by the emergency services showed a gaping hole in the facade of the long block of flats and rescue workers digging through debris for survivors. National Police later said the search operation had been completed after 19 hours, with rescuers finding 9 bodies in the ruins, while 13 people were wounded. Among the dead were 3 couples, men and women between the ages of 61 and 74, Ukrainian prosecutors said. Those killed also included a 37-year-old woman, while her 8-year-old daughter was wounded, the Sumy prosecutor's office said. Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump's nominee for National Intelligence Director, partially recanted her views that Russia was provoked into invading Ukraine during a tense confirmation hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Colorado Senator Michael Bennet attacked Gabbard for a tweet sent out just hours after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, in which she said, "This war and suffering could have easily been avoided if Biden admin NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns." While she did not explain those remarks, she did indicate that she had had a change of heart. Asked bluntly who she blamed for the war between Russia and Ukraine, she said, "Putin started the invasion of Ukraine." On Thursday, Sweden's government pledged an additional $1.2 billion in military aid to Ukraine, saying Europe needed to prepare to shoulder a larger part in supporting Kyiv. Defence Minister Pal Johnson said the package, the country's 18th since Russia's 2022 invasion, was the largest to date and was a sign that Sweden was ready to support Ukraine in the long term. Ukraine's foreign ministry summoned Slovakia's ambassador on Thursday to reject accusations that it is meddling in its neighbour's internal affairs and to accuse Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico of being a mouthpiece for Russia. Kyiv and Bratislava have been at odds for weeks over Ukraine's decision not to extend the Russian gas transit deal that expired at the end of December. Kyiv's moves came a day after Slovakia's foreign ministry said it had summoned the Ukrainian ambassador to protest against Ukrainian comments, criticising Fico that it said amounted to interference in Slovak affairs. A UK citizen who was captured fighting on the Ukrainian side in Russia's Kursk region will face terrorism and mercenary charges that could see him jailed for years, Russian state investigators said on Thursday. Moscow announced in November it had captured James Anderson, describing him as a former British soldier. It was not reported how Anderson pleaded to the charges, some of which are punishable by up to 20 years in jail if he is found guilty. And now the Middle East update. At least 47,460 Palestinians have been killed and 111,580 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. That's according to the Gaza Health Authority. The health needs in Gaza are immense and there is large-scale devastation of the health system, the World Health Organization has said. And Hamas has confirmed which 3 of the remaining hostages will be released on Saturday, naming Ofer Calderon, 54, Keith Siegel, 65, and Yarden Bibas, 35. The Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, one of the main routes for getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, will reopen on Saturday after the 4th phase of the hostage for prisoners exchange, a Hamas official has told the AFP. The first 50 people requiring medical evacuation will be allowed to leave Gaza on Saturday, and the European Union has restarted its civilian mission at the crossing, with the bloc's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, saying the mission would support Palestinian border personnel and allow the transfer of individuals out of Gaza, including those who need medical care. The UK, France and Germany have reiterated their grave concern about Israel's ban on the UN's agency for the Palestinians. UNRWA saying, or the UNRWA saying in a joint statement, We urge the government of Israel to work with international partners, including the UN, to ensure continuity of operations. Hundreds of people have gathered on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing, waving Egyptian and Palestinian flags to protest President Trump's suggestion that the people of Gaza should be moved into Egypt and Jordan. Trump has repeated the proposal, saying when asked how he would pressure Egypt and Jordan to take so many people, we do a lot for them, and they're going to do it. Keir Starmer has spoken by phone with Emily Damari, a freed British-Israeli hostage who was released on the 19th of January after spending 471 days in captivity. The next item is new research commissioned by the SNP and conducted by the House of Commons Library to coincide with the five-year anniversary of Britain's official exit from the EU demonstrates the depth of the damage Brexit continues to inflict. The new House of Commons research confirms cumulative GDP growth from 2019 to 2024 is estimated to be almost 2% lower in the UK compared to the EU. The UK was up 3.4%, while the EU 27 are up 5.3%. Also broken down as GDP per head, those figures indicate Brexit has already cost every UK citizen £750 per annum. Also, UK exports are down to the EU by minus 18%, to non-EU countries by minus 15%. Also, exports to the EU are now lower monetary value than every year since 2010. Also, UK food prices rose by 25% between December 2019 and March 2023. This research cites an estimate that without Brexit, food prices would have been increased by 17%. That's 8 percentage points less. Also, a loss of £16 billion in the EU funding since 2020, and a fall in hospitality and agriculture workers and EU workers in general. And in total, and adjusted to 2024 prices, EU research and innovation funding to the UK averaged about £1,382 million per year between 2012 and 2016, and that fell to £974 million between 2017 and 2021, and then fell again much more sharply to £93 million per year between 2022 and 2024. On Thursday, analysis published by the Scottish Government and conducted by the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor has estimated Brexit trade barriers could impact Scotland's economy by £4 billion. The Prime Minister and UK Labour government also confirmed during the week that they would not be acknowledging today's 5-year Brexit anniversary and will not authorise a new economic impact assessment of leaving the EU. SNP Europe spokesperson Stephen Gethin said, "For 5 years, Westminster's deliberate and damaging denial of Brexit has hit people in the pocket, hurt our businesses and harmed our relationships with our nearest neighbours. It was political and economic madness 5 years ago, and its damage is deepening by the day. It was a decision Scotland never voted for, but we have been left paying the price." He went on to say Sir Keir Starmer has spent an awful lot of time talking about a reset with our EU partners, but the reality is that the only reset that will work is to, at the very least, rejoin the EU single market and the customs union. 5 years on, it's time to end the isolationism and return to the European fold. And 5 years on since Scotland left the EU against its will, the SNP has said that only independence offers a route to return. The call from SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown comes as polling shows that public support for Brexit has dropped to its lowest level ever, with only 30% of Britons now believing that leaving was the correct decision. During the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, the No campaign promised that the only way to guarantee Scotland's EU membership was by voting against independence. But despite voting against independence, Scotland has subsequently been dragged out of the EU anyway, despite an overwhelming majority of Scots voting to remain. Again, despite the significant damage that leaving the EU has done to Scotland's businesses, public services and the economy, the UK Labour government has ruled out rejoining the single market or customs union. Commenting, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, 5 years ago today, Scotland was dragged out of the EU against our will, despite 62% of Scots and every area of Scotland voting to stay in. Despite the promises of the No campaign that the only way to protect Scotland's membership of the EU was by voting against independence, Scotland did vote against independence, and yet we were dragged out of the EU anyway. He went on to say the consequences of that decision have been a disaster for Scotland. Less trade, higher costs, more barriers for our young people seeking to work and travel abroad, and despite that, all the Westminster parties now unanimously back Brexit because they fear the wrath of voters in England. He continued, "We need to be clear, the only way for Scotland to re-enter the European Union now is with independence." A lack of data and a breach in spending limits relating to Post Office Horizon compensation schemes have led Gareth Davies, the head of the National Audit Office, the NAO, to issue a qualified opinion on the Department for Business and Trade, that's the DBT's, their 2023-24 final statements. The first is that DBT is responsible for supporting business to create jobs, opportunities and prosperity across the country. The Business Secretary is the sole shareholder in Post Office Limited, which has launched a number of schemes to compensate current and former postmasters affected by the failings of the Horizon IT system at the Post Office and the associated miscarriages of justice. One such scheme is the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, or HSS, which is intended to support those who experience financial discrepancies related to previous versions of the Horizon IT system. Individuals who qualify for HSS can choose to either accept a fixed sum of £75,000 or opt for full assessment by an independent advisory panel. The Post Office is inviting current and former postmasters to apply to HSS if they wish to but haven't yet done so, as there will be a closing date for the scheme. It has advised DBT that it anticipates a response rate of approximately 25 to 30% and that the majority of new claimants will accept the fixed sum offer. That the majority of new claimants will accept the fixed sum offer. However, due to the limited amount of available data on which to base this estimate, the eventual outcome could vary significantly. DBT is also responsible for delivering the Horizon Conviction Redress Scheme, or the HCRS, and that's intended to compensate individuals who had their convictions overturned. Because this scheme is in its very early stages, there is limited data upon which to base an estimate of future settlement values. DBT has assumed that the proportion of applicants who choose to accept the fixed sum offer rather than submit a full claim for detailed assessment will be similar to the take-up rate for those who had their convictions overturned by the court and are being compensated through the overturned conviction, or OC scheme, and that the average settlement value for those choosing not to accept the HCRS fixed sum award will be significantly lower than its equivalent estimate for OC claimants. In light of the limited evidence backing up DBT's assumptions regarding both HSS and HCRS, the head of the NAO has limited the scope of his audit opinion. The Scottish Government Housing Minister, Paul McLennan, has written to the UK Government calling on them to reverse the recent budget decision to keep rates at 2024-25 levels for the coming year, further widening the gap between local housing allowance rates and real-world rents. In his letter to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Mr McLennan said, "Whilst we continue to do all we can to support households struggling with the impact of the freeze within devolved powers, the UK Government must commit to unfreezing LHA rates. Research from the Resolution Foundation estimates that permanently repegging the LHA rates to the 30th percentile of local rents would mean 75,000 fewer children in poverty by the end of the UK Parliament. This is a missed opportunity to help lift many children out of poverty." He continued, "I am therefore calling on you to end the uncertainty and ensure that the LHA rates will permanently meet at least the 30th percentile of local rents in future years. The upcoming spring statement is an opportunity to reverse the freeze and deliver adequate support to private sector tenants." Keir Starmer's planned people smuggling laws risk criminalising hundreds of asylum seekers, Refuge Charities have said, after it emerged that people who refused to be rescued by the French authorities could be jailed for 5 years. Some parents who bring their children to the UK in small boats could also face prosecution, which could ultimately split their families, a human rights assessment of the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill has concluded. The bill, introduced to the UK Parliament on Thursday, will also allow people smugglers to be jailed for up to 14 years for handling small boat parts, and will strengthen police powers to seize laptops, financial assets and mobile phones from suspected smugglers. Campaigners have expressed concern that the bill maintains some of the draconian powers introduced by the Conservative government, including making it harder for people to claim they are victims of modern slavery, and powers to impose caps on the number of people allowed into the UK on safe and legal routes. Refugee groups have criticised the bill, saying it would criminalise legitimate asylum seekers who are forced to help gangs while en route to the UK, and could make the cross-channel route more dangerous. Enver Solomon, the chief executive of the Refugee Council, said, "We are very concerned that by creating new offences, many refugees themselves could also be prosecuted, which has already been happening in some cases. This would be a gross miscarriage of justice, criminalising men, women and children who have fled conflicts in countries such as Sudan does not disrupt the smuggling gang's business model. When a refugee is clambering into a boat with an armed criminal threatening them, they are not thinking about UK laws, but are simply trying to stay alive." The failure to repeal Priti Patel's Illegal Migration Act means that asylum and human rights claims from countries including Albania, Georgia and India are automatically inadmissible, a spokesperson for Asylum Aid said. Alison Pickup, the organisation's executive director, said, "Further criminalisation and measures blocking people from protection will do nothing to address the causes of forced displacement and unauthorised movement through Europe to the UK." Excuse me. The German Parliament has rejected a bill to tighten immigration controls brought by the frontrunner to be the next Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, with the backing of the far-right Alternative für Deutschland. It came after a similar but non-binding motion was passed by Parliament on Wednesday, with the votes of the AfD prompting a wave of protest from those who said it was a breach of Germany's long-standing firewall between the far right and the mainstream. The bill was rejected by 350 to 338 out of 693 MPs who voted, including 5 abstentions. Wednesday's motion was the first time in Germany's post-war history that a parliamentary majority was reached with the help of the far right, greatly heightening tensions before Friday's debate. Opponents included members of Merz's own CDU-CSU alliance who rebelled, as well as members of the pro-business Free Democratic Party, or the FDP, who had voted for the original motion but wanted the law to return to internal committees for further debate. The influx limitation law, the name and detail of which has been criticised, was considered of such historic importance that the plenary hall was unusually full, and some MPs were reportedly persuaded to leave their sick beds to be present. Merz, who will lead the Christian Democratic Union into the 23rd of February elections, said his bill was necessary for German domestic security and denied he was working with the AfD or had any intention of doing so. Attempts by the Social Democrats, the SPD, their coalition partners the Greens, as well as their former coalition partner the FDP, to stop the law's passage by referring it back to the committee earlier in the day were unsuccessful. There has been widespread opposition to the proceedings, including the decision by a 99-year-old Holocaust survivor, Albert Weinberg, to return to the German state his Order of Merit over the Wednesday vote, as well as the resignation from the CDU of Michael Friedman, a prominent German-French publicist and former deputy chair of the Central Council of Jews in Germany. After this week's dramatic scenes in Parliament, during which Merz, the Conservative opposition leader, was accused of courting the far right, parallels have been drawn with the events that led to the Nazi Party taking taking power through the political process amid a lack of unity among mainstream parties. Rolf Mutzenich, the chair of the SFD parliamentary group, said Weimar failed because of the lack of unity in democracy, but Weimar also failed because the authoritarian mindset never completely disappeared. He had urged Merz to reverse his decision and re-establish the firewall against cooperating with the AfD. He suggested that if Merz failed to do so, he would have to live with a politically damaged reputation. Protests have taken place across Germany over the perceived shift to the right of the German parliament. At the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin on Thursday evening, a line of young people held up a long string of illuminated letters spelling out the slogan "Hope and Resistance." On a poster bearing the CDU's name, the word Brandmauer or firewall had been crossed out and replaced with the word Brandstifter or arsonist. New research by YouGov has found that almost half of Danish people now consider the US to be a considerable threat to their country, and the overwhelming majority oppose Greenland leaving to become part of the US. The research published in The Guardian comes after weeks of tension between Denmark, Greenland and the US over Donald Trump's repeated assertions that he plans to take control of the autonomous territory, which is part of the Danish kingdom. The Arctic island, which has a population of 57,000 people, was formerly ruled as a colony by Denmark, which continues to control its foreign and security policy. Trump's interest in Greenland comes at a time of growing momentum for its pre-existing independence movement. The poll of just over 1,000 people in Denmark, conducted between the 15th and 22nd of January, found that 46% considered the US to be either a very big threat or a fairly big threat to Denmark. This is higher than the number who said they considered North Korea or Iran a threat, of which 44% and 40% did respectively. But the threat of Russia remains considerably higher. 86% of respondents said they considered Moscow a threat. Of those surveyed, 78% they would oppose Greenland being sold to the US, but 72% said the final decision should be Greenland's, not Denmark's. The findings come in a week in which the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, toured Berlin, Paris and Brussels to shore up support amid Trump's Greenland threats after a reportedly horrendous call with the US President. Frederiksen said Europe must unite in the face of changing relations with the US. I want to ensure that all of Europe stands together, not only in connection with the Kingdom of Denmark, but also more broadly, she said. Trump has said the US needs control of Greenland and the Panama Canal for economic security, and has described ownership and control of the territory as an absolute necessity. An opinion poll published earlier this week found that 85% of Greenlanders did not want the island to become part of the US. Federal government workers have been left shocked by the upheaval wreaked by Donald Trump's return to the presidency, amid signs that he is bent on exacting revenge on a bureaucracy he considers to be a deep state that previously thwarted and persecuted him. Since being restored to the White House on the 20th of January, the president has gone on a revenge spree against high-profile figures who previously served him but earned his enmity by slighting or criticising him in public. Trump has cancelled Secret Service protection for 3 senior national security officials in his first presidency. John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, Mike Pompeo, who was CIA Director and Secretary of State, and Brian Hook, a former Assistant Secretary of State, even though all are assassination targets on an Iranian government hit list. The same treatment has been meted out to Anthony Fauci, the infectious diseases expert who angered Trump after joining the White House task force tackling COVID-19, who has also faced death threats. Trump has also fired high-profile figures from government roles on his social media site and stripped 51 former intelligence officials of their security clearances for doubting reports about Hunter Biden's laptop as possible Russian disinformation. Some senior officials saw the writing on the wall and resigned before his return, but others adopted a hope for the best attitude, only to be shocked by what awaited them, according to insiders. Career officials at the Department of Justice have been summarily fired, despite having civil service job protection, after being told they cannot be trusted to implement the returning president's agenda. Among those purged are lawyers who were assigned to the investigation of Trump by the special prosecutor Jack Smith over his attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election and his removal of a trove of classified documents from the White House. Also targeted have been about 30 government watchdogs known as inspectors general and responsible for rooting out corruption and wrongdoing. They were dismissed en masse last Friday night without the legally required 30-day notice being given to Congress. One possible motivation animating Trump's grievance against the group is that it was an Inspector General who initially informed Congress that Trump was improperly pressuring Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden during his last presidency, leading to his first impeachment. Last week, in tactics more redolent of the totalitarian regimes of Last week, in tactics more redolent of totalitarian regimes, the United States has historically criticised federal workers. I'm really sorry, I'm going to read that again. Last week, in tactics more redolent of totalitarian regimes, the United States has historically criticised. Federal workers were warned of adverse consequences if they failed to report their colleagues who refused to comply with the administration's purge of diversity, equity and inclusion, otherwise known as DEI programs, or who tried to sustain the programs with coded language. An executive order titled Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government has been described as a roadmap for retribution. First Minister John Swinney has welcomed the appointment of Scotland's new Lord Justice Clerk by His Majesty the King. The Right Honourable Lord Beckett will succeed the Right Honourable Lady Dorian as Scotland's second most senior judge after she retires on Monday the 3rd of February. As Lord Justice Clerk, he will also hold the office of President of the Second Division of the Inner House of the Court of Session and serve as the Chair of the Scottish Sentencing Council. A former Solicitor General, Lord Beckett was appointed as a Supreme Court's judge in May 2016, then elevated to the Inner House of the Court of Session in July 2023. He has been involved in the work to review court procedures for sexual offence cases, improve trauma training for judges and simplify the guidance given to juries. Lord Beckett was nominated for appointment by the First Minister based on the advice of a selection panel. The First Minister said, "I offer my warmest congratulations to Lord Beckett on his appointment as Lord Justice Clerk, reflecting a long and distinguished career of service in Scotland's legal system." He went on to say the Lord Justice Clerk is one of the great offices of state in Scotland and the second most senior figure in the judicial system, with a prominent role in the criminal appeals system. It is a significant appointment that requires careful consideration, so I am very grateful to the members of the selection panel for their advice before I nominated Lord Beckett. He went on to say Lady Dorian Lady Dorian was the first woman appointed to such a senior judicial office in Scotland. Her legacy will be significant not only for that reason, but as a result of her advocacy for vulnerable victims and witnesses, and her commitment to making court proceedings more transparent. Lady Dorian leaves office with my gratitude and best wishes for the future. Engineers from the University of Glasgow have developed a new wireless tag system which can identify objects and measure temperature without the use of microchips. The new form of electronic tag is more sustainable and could help reduce the vast environmental impact caused by single-use RFID technologies, according to the researchers. The tags use inexpensive coils and a sensing material made from a form of silicon rubber called PDMS and carbon fibres instead of microchips. The coils, smaller than the ones found in credit cards, absorb electromagnetic signals from a handheld reader using electromagnetic waves. The researchers The researchers say their new, less wasteful tags could help reduce the retail sector's reliance on RFID chips, which use more than 10 billion tags each year. Most tags are used just once and end up in landfill without appropriate recycling of the electronics. The team's new tags are capable of carrying identifying information as well as taking real-time measurements of temperature. The tags can be read by wireless handheld devices costing less than £100. The tags could help create future generations of smart packaging, which could also measure pH or humidity, providing retailers with warnings when food is at risk of spoiling or carrying harmful bacteria. The flexible and lightweight tags could also find use in healthcare and smart clothing, where they could unobtrusively monitor wearers' vital signs. In a paper published in the journal Advanced Science, the researchers discuss how they developed the technology and tested it in lab technicians. They show how sensors can detect variations in temperature between 20 degrees Celsius and 110 degrees Celsius, and this could help future wireless sensors cheaper and more sustainable, as fewer devices will now be required to cover the same temperature sensing range. The tags performed particularly well between 20 and 60 degrees centigrade, the range most relevant for food safety and medical applications. They are capable of reacting quickly to changes in temperature, taking just seconds to register significant changes. Dr. Mahmoud Vagin, a lecturer at the University of Glasgow's James Watt School of Engineering, is the study's corresponding author. He said, developing wireless sensing tags is crucial for monitoring temperature across supply chains, particularly in food safety and medical applications. By eliminating the need for microchips, these chipless tags could significantly reduce both cost and electronic waste compared to traditional RFID sensors. So that's it for this evening, Scotland at 7. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We have raised £20,000, or we did raise £20,000 between April and the end of 2024, but that was £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We've since borrowed £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is on and we still need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We have costs of about £4,000 a month, and we receive £2,500 in donations every month, for which we're grateful, but if we had more regular subscribers, we'd be able to clear our debts as well. You know that our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please simply donate whatever you can afford. But other than that, thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the full Scottish on Sunday. Good night.